Stephanie.
And I'm Allison.
And this is Nerd of the Week, a randomly generated fandom podcast. Allison, what do you think the generator's going to tell us today?
The word of the week is fairy.
Oh yeah, fairy. And, you know, eventually I'll have not quickly Googled the definition of word, but today is not that day.
Hey, at least we're consistent.
At least I'm consistent. A small imaginary being of human form that has magical powers, typically female. Thanks for that beautiful definition, Google.
Typically female. Interesting.
I guess if you're thinking like Tinkerbell or that's my only thought that comes to mind that quickly.
I guess so. Okay, I'm thinking now of Thumbelina. And
that's fair.
I feel like most of the fairies are male that we like see in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, because there's the prince's mother, but then there's the king and the prince himself. And we don't really see too many other fairies.
Yeah.
Other than Thumbelina at the end. That's not what we're talking about this week, or at least I hope it's not what you're talking about.
It's
not what I'm talking about. Okay.
No. I think we have a different exposure to the fairy medium than like what Google's classic definition is, but that's cool.
Probably. All right.
So, what are you talking about?
Okay, so I actually kind of teased this a few episodes back when we were talking about vampires.
Okay.
So it is the Johannes Cabal series. I'm going to particularly focus on the third book of the series called Johannes Cabal, The Fear Institute.
Okay.
And by the way, these books are all written by Jonathan L. Howard. So kind of to give a little bit of background on the whole series, Johannes Cabal, he's the main guy. He's German, but was brought up in England in kind of like a Victorian-ish time. It's a little bit difficult to pinpoint exactly what time period it is because they talk a lot about like having balls and dancing waltzes, you know, things like that. But then they also have like blimps and guns and things like that. So it's a little steampunky.
Okay. I was gonna ask.
Maybe also like a little Sherlock Holmesy, like that sort of era.
Okay, so
Yeah.
like the oh god, what's that era called with the steam engine train era?
Like
that kind
Edwardian?
Yeah.
Maybe. It's like Gothic Edwardian, though. I don't know. It's kind of a false Earth universe because
Industrial
like magic
era.
and
Industrial era. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, there we go. But it's a lot more whimsical than the real industrial era, which I like.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yes, it's a fake world, which is what we like here. So anyway, Johannes Cabal is a necromancer of some little infamy, is how he's described in all of the books. A little bit like Captain Jack Sparrow in that way, where you have heard of him. Except in this case, no one's heard of Cabal, but whatever. His driving goal in life is to resurrect somebody from his past. And it's a little bit unclear who this is. It's kind of inferred that it's probably his girlfriend/wife, but I feel like if you read it in a certain way, like maybe it's his sister, it's definitely not his mother because she at one point is said to have moved back to Germany after some shenanigans with the whole family, it happens all in a different book that we're not focusing on today.
Okay.
But anyway, so Johannes considers himself first a scientist and a man of reasons, but he really wants to perfect his craft of necromancy. I guess it's a little bit like what was that one that you brought? The anime with the armor.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah, Full Metal Alchemist. I guess it's a little bit like that too, where they go on a magical quest to bring someone back.
Okay.
So anyway, in the first book, which is, oh gosh, what's it called? Oh no, I did not prepare well for this at all. Gosh.
We are professionals.
Oh, I think it's just called Johannes Cabal, the Necromancer. But it kind of starts in media res a little bit, where Cabal is actually trying to get his soul back from Satan. Apparently, he had traded his soul to get his necromancy abilities, but he is keen and cunning. Yeah, as you do. And he wants his soul back because he realizes that that's kind of the missing key to a lot of what necromancy is that he has to have a soul as well. And he actually wins. He tricks Satan, gets his soul back. Yeah, that's all great. But anyway, in this third book, it's kind of a little detour from his main plot, but it still kind of propels his story forward.
Okay.
But basically, he's enlisted by this thing called the Fear Institute to kill the source of all human fear. So now we'll get into, why did I pick this for the word fairy? Because it doesn't really involve them a whole lot.
Okay.
But it opens with this description of his house. So it's very gothic and Victorian, it's kind of like 3 stories high, very like imposing and kind of dark sounding, but it's very well maintained. It also has a very terrifying looking front garden. So he usually doesn't get visitors because he does not like them. Gosh, I'm bringing so many parallels into this book, but he's a little bit like Shrek in that way, where he likes his area, it's his swamp, quote unquote, and you're not supposed to go into it. So I actually have a quote here that I wanted to read.
All right.
The visitors that he's having, he looks out the window, and the quote says, "He was therefore surprised when he saw 3 soberly dressed men standing on the other side of the garden gate. One looked like an undertaker in Cabal, who had had a similar experience once before, checked his pulse just to be sure. Pleased to find that he wasn't dead again, he went to the front door." So, he has died a few times, but not really, not fully dead.
Hasn't stuck.
And, yeah. So anyway, he meets these guys, and they're still, like, on the other side of his garden wall. He's, like, yelling across the garden to them. And that's where the fairies come in here. So they have a proposal for him. He's like, "What sort of proposal?" And they say, "Well, we would rather discuss it inside, but our immediate concern is to reach your front door." He says, "My front... Oh!" Cabal understood and laughed. He looked down. Just over the tile-ridged edge of the garden alongside the path was a faded circular for patios and conservatory extensions. There had probably been others, but they had blown away long since, this one staying only because it was trapped beneath a discarded human femur. The surface of the bone was pocketed with tiny bite marks. He looked back up at the men, a sardonic smile on his face. "You are concerned about the denizens of this little plot. Gentlemen, they are only pixies and fairies. You're not afraid of them, are you?" "Yeah, we're harmless," piped a tiny voice from beneath a hydrangea until it was shushed by many other tiny piping voices. So his garden is guarded by the pixies and fairies, which are apparently very terrifying and will eat you alive. Hence why I picked this whole thing for fairy.
I like it.
Yes, so we will now go on with the rest of the plot summary of this little book. So his visitors are Misters Shadrach, Cord, and Bose, and they are from the Fear Institute, and their main goal is to abolish the concept of fear, and they describe it as the little death that eats away at our daily lives and holds us back. So basically, they want to improve everyone's life. That's to be debated.
Uh-huh.
So in order to find the embodiment of fear, they have to travel to this place called the Dreamlands, where the incorporeal can manifest into the corporeal, and they have named the embodiment of fear the phobic animus, which is fancy. In the past, we learned that Cabal has actually looked into the Dreamlands before because he thinks, well, maybe these hold the key to my necromancy. But he has been unable to get to the Dreamlands because he is a man of reason, and the Dreamlands thus block him out. And the only way that he would actually be able to access the Dreamlands would be if he had the, quote, silver key, which has long been since lost to history. So he thought that the Dreamlands were completely inaccessible.
Okay.
Now, it turns out that the Fear Institute has located the silver key. These 3 guys have it in their possession, and they just need him, who they know has kind of extensive research on the topic, to go as their guide into the Dreamlands. And Cabal kind of hems and haws. He's not really on board with this whole plan, but he does think I can use this to my advantage for my own means and actually get some useful knowledge out of it. So sure, I will go to the Dreamlands with you. He then has to find the gate for them to figure out how to get in with the key. And he says, well, I done some casting this morning, and I found that the gate is currently in Arkham, Massachusetts, USA.
Of course it is.
Yeah, exactly. So they travel from England to Arkham, Massachusetts. In the beginning of the next chapter, we kind of open on this college student in Arkham who's a poet, apparently. He's not a very good poet. And apparently he keeps having, like, very strange dreams. Mm-hmm. And Cabal kind of, like, just bursts into his dorm room one night with these guys. And he's, like, all scared. He's like, oh my gosh, what? There's a portal to the Dreamlands here? And Cabal's like, yes, it is. And he takes the key and apparently jams it into this guy's forehead.
Oh no.
And they describe it very graphically, where it's like there was a cracking of bone and blood spurted onto the walls. But apparently after that, as Cabal turns the key, the guy, like, disintegrates. But a portal is then opened, and they're able to get into the Dreamlands. However, because of all this magical commotion, they've attracted the interest, I would say, of the local ghouls. Oh. So ghouls are these weird kind of human-like but monstrous animals, kind of, that they used to be humans, but now they are this completely different species. And they apparently are not tethered to any one place in time. So Cabal kind of is the one who has to fight them away because the rest of the party cannot fight. They're useless, basically. So he ushers them into the Dreamlands portal, and he kind of stays back to fight. And as he's about to jump into the portal, as he's kind of kicking the ghouls away, one of them stops and says, I know you! And Cabal thinks, that's weird. I've never met a ghoul. But, you know, he doesn't have much time to think about that because the portal closes behind them, and now they're in Dreamlands. So, apparently, the Dreamlands are all like a manifestation of everybody's dreams. Everywhere in the universe, wherever there's life that dreams, it manifests in the Dreamlands.
That's
so it's kind of
wild there.
Yeah. They don't describe it a whole lot, like the initial view that they have, and I think on purpose, just so that we have to kind of think of, oh, what would we think the Dreamlands looks like, which I think is very clever. Mm-hmm. But we do get other descriptions of other scenery later on in the book as well, so it's not fully left up to our own imagination, which I think it's a nice balance. Mm-hmm. Oh, and Cabal also notices they've all had a costume change. So all these guys who were like kind of drably dressed before, just like their black suits and everything. One of them's like all fancy, like a wealthy Dutch merchant, and one of them looks like a painter, and the other is like a Renaissance man. Cabal, however, looks exactly like he did before, except one of his buttons that was loose is now nicely sewn back on. Oh. And everyone fathoms like, oh, so Cabal, it's because you're exactly what you want to be already. And that is a very astute observation. And yeah,
he just
that's
wants
it.
His button fixed. God, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Just my self-image
right?
being that perfect already.
Right? And then he has a map, and he's like, now, gentlemen, I don't promise that this map is at all accurate, because remember, I've never been here before. This is all just from the rantings and ravings of lunatics that I had interviewed back when I was doing my research initially. And so he can't really tell them how far or near anything is, and he kind of knows just the general idea of where to go. And he's like, we have to ask the people who live here often where we need to go, because they'll have more of an idea. Well, as we find out, that's not always a great plan. They come up upon some fishermen along their way, and the fishermen are like, sure, we'll help you go to this place. We'll take you there. As it turns out, suddenly, like, their whole scenery magically changes, and they see the fishermen going on down the river with, like, these cheeky grins on their face, and they realize that somehow they've been into a time jump, and also a place jump, I guess, because now they're suddenly in the dark forest, which is capitalized. Oh, no. And they realize they've been tricked.
Yeah.
While they're here, they are assaulted by what they think are cherubs at first, but they're like spiders at the same time. It's very creepy.
Oh, no thank you.
Where they're described as having like childlike angelic faces, but the bodies of spiders.
Don't like that.
Yeah,
don't like that.
Nope, it's not good at all. It's really not. And then Cabal accidentally calls upon a dead, forgotten god that everyone had assumed was dead. And so he thinks it's just going to be a scare tactic for the cherubs. But instead they all die.
Ooh. Well.
And then as they kind of wander into the forest a little bit deeper, they come across this village that they assume had belonged to this race of things. And there's like these empty egg sacs, and they're like, not only did you kill everyone who was fighting us, you killed the entire race by calling on this god. And Cabal's like, this is not good. Gonna have to file this away for thinking later. Yeah. Because if a god has done him a favor, he now owes something to that god or something like that.
Sure. Okay.
So that's kind of one of the first weirdnesses that happens to them in the Dreamlands. There's also a lot of tension between Cabal and the rest of the party. He really doesn't like them. There's not too much he has against Shadrach. He doesn't really factor in much. For Cord, he's particularly discordant with. And then Bowie tries to be a little bit of a peacekeeper. Bowie also seems to be kind of annoying. He has like this childlike ignorance about him and is just like ridiculously jolly all the time and really gets on Cabal's nerves.
That's fair.
Yeah. Anyway, they now come across like kind of a bigger town to gather information about where to go next, and Cabal says, "Gentlemen, I need to do some stuff here in the town. We all should split up." What Cabal is doing, he's going to the cemetery where he heard that there's both ghouls and also a witch. So he goes to the cemetery and everyone's like, "Oh, don't go up the hill, that's where the ghouls are." He doesn't care, he's not scared. As he's going up, he does encounter the ghouls, and magically, that same ghoul that he met back in Arkham is there again.
The wait, I know you guy?
Yeah, he threatens like, "I do know you, Johannes Cabal." And he's like, "Okay, cool, where's the witch?"
Yeah. That's great and all, but I got other things.
Yeah, and the ghoul is actually like fairly intelligent. Usually the ghouls are like incomprehensible, monstrous kind of things, but this one is like actually intelligent. It actually knows English instead of just ghoulish. Oh. And it kind of tells him where to go. So he goes and meets the witch. It turns out he actually knows this witch. It is a certain Miss Smith, and he knew her when she was alive back on Earth. Apparently she was like performing some sort of spell or seance or something and got into too deep of a trance that everyone thought she was dead. But they also thought she was a witch, and so they hung her, which is also ghoulish. And so she died, and her body was trapped in the Dreamlands. Which, I guess she's still technically alive then? I don't know. It's a little weird. Yeah. But she does actually kind of help him, gives him some advice as to where to go and, what to be careful of and who to go meet. He meets back up with the party, and they end up traveling across the ocean. There's a few other beats in the story, but it doesn't really pertain to the actual story. It's just kind of like them getting to the ocean and getting to their main event, which they're trying to get to this temple. When they get to the temple, Cabal actually starts to notice that the Dreamlands have started to take a toll on everybody. So Shadrach, he seems to be like aging really quickly. Cord, I guess he has a kind of like a high view of himself, and he's becoming like more tyrannical almost. He's described as like more like Julius Caesar by the day.
Uh-oh, that's not good.
Yes, but then Bowie, he's still stupid and childlike, and Cabal isn't sure what's really changing with himself. He feels he's not observing whatever subtle differences there are. Due to unfortunate circumstances, Shadrach is killed by monsters. Oh. And they do kind of gain the final piece of the clue from this temple. They actually find a dead oracle. They steal his skull, and the skull kind of helps be their guide for the rest of the journey. but have to go on with Shadrach. At this point, the whole party is like, oh my gosh, should we go back? And Bose wants to go on. He's like, Cabal, you take Cord back with you. And Cabal's like, sorry, friend, but we can't actually get back at this point. We must go on. So either we all just stay here, or we push through. We can't just go back. Mm. There's also apparently an abundance of cats in the Dreamlands. And they start following this party, and, like, there's a huge herd of cats. Like, thousands of them following them. And this really unnerves Cord, and at one point he just can't take it anymore, so he, like, spins around and draws his sword on them, and then the cats, like, they're just house cats. They all attack him and kill him.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Actual nightmare.
Exactly. And Bose and Cabal are just like, we're staying out of this. We're not going to hurt the cats. It's fine. Mm-hmm. And the cats, like, stop following them. But now it's just them going on. Eventually, they find the cave of the phobic animus. And it's kind of up on a cliff. And then there's a big ravine in the cave before we get to the final passageway. And Bose is, like, looking over it like, oh, I wonder how deep it goes. And Cabal comes up behind him and pushes him off into the cliff. And then nonchalantly goes down the tunnel that will go to the phobic animus chamber. Okay. And he says he knows exactly what he'll find there. So he walks in. It's described as this, like, 50-foot round dome chamber with a single kind of throne in the center. And sitting in it is Bose. And it's because this whole time he's been masquerading as this, like, nonchalant guy, but he is actually the trickster god that Cabal accidentally called on earlier.
Oops. Womp womp.
Yeah. Yep. Apparently this whole time, though, Cabal's, like, been silently putting pieces together in his head. Okay. And he'd realized it, and he'd been kind of, like, finding the right time to, like, kill off Bose and turn him back into the god. Mm-hmm. So he knew, and then he's like, what did I ever do to you? Why are you doing this to me? And Bose, like, goes into this whole hypothetical, like, well, you've never seen me and Satan in the same room, have you? And
you've never seen me and Batman in the same room, therefore I must be Batman.
Right? So it turns out, like, he's just kind of trying to get back at Cabal for all of the, like, shenanigans that have gone on between them throughout Cabal's dealings.
Okay.
And, like, Cabal's met him in many different forms, it kind of seems like. And then eventually he says, well, what if I just gave you your heart's desire? And with a snap of the fingers, Cabal is back in his home, like, completely out of the Dreamlands. And he realizes, like, okay, I somehow have been given the ability to come up with the true necronomical phenomenon to arise the dead perfectly.
Yeah.
But he uses his time really wisely. He, like, does his experiments and, like, comes up with the correct formula. Finally, he breaks the seal on the coffin. It's, like, described as a Snow White-like coffin where it's glass and the body's perfectly preserved. And he brings back the person he's trying to bring back. It kind of shows that she's not quite as happy as he was maybe hoping she would be. And obviously he's not the person that he had been when she died.
Right.
And so just neither of them are really as happy as he ever wanted them to be. There's no way they could be. Mm-hmm. And so with, like, a kind smile, he sends her away on a train. I think she's going to Germany or something like that. And he walks back up to his house, sets up a line of explosives, and as he's getting ready to set that off on a timer, shoots himself in the head.
Oh.
Yeah. Not the end of the book, though. Okay. He's now back in the chamber with Bose. That was all
a dream.
Kind of fake. It's not necessarily a dream. Like, it was a real life, or, like, a real option of a life that he led. But by ending it, he brought himself back to this time. So, like, no time has passed in the Dreamlands. Bose is like, how did you enjoy your life? But a second has passed here. And Cabal's like, well, I didn't like the part where I died alone in a nursing home. And he's kind of, like, testing the god to see, like, how much do you actually know about what happened? And it doesn't seem like the trickster god actually knows what the life was like. Okay. He just, like, kind of gave the opportunity to live it out, essentially. Cabal, we find out, has kind of, like, really used that to his advantage. He realized that when he came back, he wasn't going to have just the immediate knowledge of the Necronomical formula, but he did have the memory of all of his experiments that he was able to perform during that time.
Oh,
so
clever.
He's essentially like time hacking and saving himself some time for the future, but still doesn't have the answer. So it's not like just a gimme to solve all his problems.
Sure.
The gods obviously wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, they kind of have this little argument about like, well, that's all I needed with you. And Cabal's like, but you have to take me back now. I can't just be stuck here. And the god's like, I don't care anymore. And he just kind of evaporates away to go off to a different dimension and get up to whatever shenanigans he's going to get up to.
Freaking trickster gods always being the worst.
Exactly. So now Cabal is like just trapped in the Dreamlands on the top of this mountain, and like there's no way he can get down anymore. It was like a 2-person operation to get up there, and now he's alone. So he's apparently on this island for like a few weeks. He's making this braided rope, and his plan is to jump into the crevasse that he had initially pushed Bowie off of in the cavern, because he thinks that there's a passageway out there. So he makes this rope, and it's like a really long descent. It's dark. He doesn't know how far he's going. But unfortunately, the rope snaps, and he falls. But then in the next chapter, this book just keeps going on and on. I'm so sorry. But in the next chapter, he awakens and finds that he's not broken and dead, and he's landed on something soft. To his dismay, he realizes that it's human hair.
Ooh, ew.
And then he also realizes that he's surrounded by hundreds of ghouls.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Yes. Now, they don't immediately kill him, which they normally would to any prone human.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the wise ghoul that he's met many times now comes out of the whole pack, and he meets him again. Like, right at this moment, all of the insanity of the Dreamlands, like, finally washes over Cabal, and he, like, loses his mind and almost kind of dies, I guess. And basically, to save himself, his body reverts into being a ghoul, or starts the transformation, rather. He doesn't immediately become a ghoul.
Okay.
But the wise ghoul says, well, never fear. We will now take care of you like family.
Ooh.
And he's like, but I don't want to be a ghoul. I have plans. And the wise ghoul says, well, don't worry. It's not an immediate transformation. You have about 6 to 8 weeks. And so Cabal says, okay, I'm going to make a formula. We're going to get me back to a human. And like all the ghouls are participating in this. They're all in on it. They no longer want to kill him, which is good. And so he sends them through time and space to collect anything he needs to make this magic elixir that will stop the ghoulish process.
How convenient. Also kind of neat.
Indeed, yes. And so it's been a few weeks now. He's perfected the elixir. Everything seems like it's going to work. And so he kind of is standing up in front of all of his new ghoul friends, and he's like, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your service. I will now take the elixir and return to my homeland. And, like, they're all sad, and then right as he's about to, like, unstopper the vial and take a drink of it, there's some signal from the wise ghoul, and they all pounce on him. And he's like, no, how could they betray me right now? The wise ghoul steals the vial and starts running away down a corridor, and at that moment we kind of see Cabal fully make the transformation into a ghoul himself.
Oh, man.
However, as he does that, a realization dawns upon him that he is the wise ghoul, and the wise ghoul is him, and he needed to have extra time as a ghoul to do something, which I think is alluded to in other books later.
Okay.
But basically, he needed more time, and so he had to become a ghoul and then make the potion for himself, and then become himself again.
How strange time dilation.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So the wise ghoul, who is Cabal, drinks the elixir, and he turns into a human, or starts turning back into a human, rather. He climbs out of the well that's in the middle of the little town at the base of the hill where his house is on. So he's almost home. He starts, like, walking up the hill, but his bag is getting heavier and heavier. He's getting more and more out of breath. It's a big process to transform back into a human. And he reaches his garden gate, and he faints. But there's another quote about the fairies, tying it back into our word of the day here. In the silver light, tiny faces peered under the gate at him, Bound into the limits of the garden by magic Cabal had used to contain them where he could keep an eye on them, the garden folk watched and speculated. "It's Johannes Cabal! Johannes Cabal!" they cried in tinkling high voices like the sound of fairy bells. "He smells like a dead dog," said one. "He looks very ill," said another, then in a slightly calculating tone, "and weak." There was some excited muttering. Then they chorused, "Come into the garden, Johannes Cabal! We will help you to the door! We will help you in! We are your little friends!" "And we won't eat you, honest!" said a voice belonging to one of the less human-savvy fae. There is angry shushing and the sound of a tiny fae creature being punched.
Oh, man.
So, even though he's their master, they're definitely going to kill him and take advantage of the dead body that is now available to them. The story kind of ends with there's a shadow that peels itself away from the house, is how it's described, comes out and picks up Cabal. The Fae are scared of this shadow and they leave them be. They let them go into the house. This shadowy being looks at Johannes's notebooks that he was carrying and makes another potion, basically, that revives him. He's in a coma for 4 days, but then finally wakes up. And kind of the last line is, "It's you, but you're dead." Oh. And then we're on to the next book.
Bum, bum, bum.
Do you want me to give spoilers for who it is?
Sure. Also have normal spoiler warnings.
Oh, yeah, all the spoiler warnings. So he was saved by his brother, who was supposed to be dead. Oh. His brother, and this is why I had brought this up back in the vampire episode, is a vampire, or rather had been. Okay. However, through a series of events in some previous books, where he had been undead as the vampire, he was then made completely dead, but somehow he is now not dead again.
Oh.
Yes, but he's still a vampire.
Mystery.
Yes. So that is the Fear Institute of Johannes Cabal.
I like it.
It's written very well. It's quite satirical and like dark humor, and it calls upon a lot of, I guess, like blasphemous kind of lore.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of Faust in the first book. This one kind of follows a lot on Lovecraft.
Okay.
And I mean, obviously Lovecraft is a sketchy character, but I feel like this is not a sketchy book. It's a good book.
Yeah. It gives me like
the whole series is really good.
Good Omens, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman vibes.
Definitely. Yeah. I think Jonathan Howard definitely pulls a lot of his, what's it called? Inspiration from those types of authors. Okay. Maybe also a little bit like Douglas Adams with that style of writing. Because it's very British as well. Okay. But yeah, it definitely falls right into that niche of books that I like, that are like very kind of dark and mysterious. Not like high fantasy, but like steampunk fantasy.
You should read Kill the Farm Boy by Delilah Dawson. It's very much in that vein. It's The Tales of Pale, and it's like the beginning of the book starts with like the chosen one, and he's going to be the hero, and then this chick in like chainmail armor accidentally falls on him and kills him, and they're like, ah crap, now what do we do? And there's Toby the Dark Lord, who kind of is giving me this Cabal vibes, which made me think of
Toby.
It. Yeah, he's Toby the Dark Lord.
That's great. Already I know it's a good book.
It gives me similar vibes, different, maybe more Monty Python vibes.
Yes.
But more Monty Python-esque, but I feel like in your vein. Anyway.
Okay.
Side tangent aside.
No, we like recommendations here. Thank you. So I have just 2 bits of trivia, and they're not very good bits of trivia,
Sure.
And I apologize for that.
It's okay.
But anyway, are you ready for them?
I am so ready.
So the first one is, what is the type of animal that most people ride in the Dreamlands?
Oh.
The options are pigs, camels, zebras, and giant chickens.
I like all of these answers. I'm going to go with zebras.
Yeah, zebras. Nice. And then the second one is a different format. It's true or false.
Okay.
So, true or false? Fairies are carnivorous.
True.
Yes.
Based on the fact
Because they will eat
they will
you.
absolutely eat you.
All right. So that was my adventure for the week.
Excellent. I approve of it. It sounds delightful. I am going to add it to my ever-growing list of books I need to read.
Well, we'll never get to our lists.
No.
Much as we add to them, I feel like they will never be fully completed.
It's like your anime watch list is always just going to get longer and never actually completed. But it's okay, because you just have all of this good content to absorb.
Yeah, always something to be entertained by.
Or you can listen to our podcast and we can summarize it for you.
Yes, and you can make your friends listen to our podcast. We can summarize it for them.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, listening to summaries of things then frees you up for time to actually watch other things.
It's true. It's true. All right, so I have a quote for you.
Perfect.
So, fairies have to be one thing or the other, because being so small, they unfortunately have room for one feeling only at a time. They are, however, allowed to change, only it must be a complete change.
All right.
So, Wally.
Interesting. I thought I knew where it was from at first, but I'm going to have to think about
All
it.
right. We'll get that answer after I talk to you about Labyrinth.
Oh, yes.
Because my first and second instincts for fairy were Legend of Zelda and Dresden Files, and I just recently talked about those. And then I was like, what am I going to talk about? And then Labyrinth and the beautiful man that is David Bowie came to mind, and then I got to rewatch Labyrinth, and I wasn't mad about it. So
I almost brought Labyrinth for Clock last week
Oh.
because of the time limit that she has to complete whatever task it is.
valid.
Yeah, I don't remember all of it, so I'm glad that you're talking about it.
Yeah. So sounds like you've seen it before.
Once.
Okay.
And as I said, I don't remember much of it.
So Labyrinth, it was made in 1986 by Jim Henson, the puppet wizard god, and George Lucas and Lucasfilms is an executive producer on the project, which I completely forgot about.
Okay.
And they...
So is it part of the Star Wars universe?
That's for the people who do weird lore and theories, but I feel like it should be if it's not, and it's just its own little planet somewhere. But no.
Anyway, don't mean to derail this.
Oh, it's fine. Lucas and Henson were friends, and I believe they had worked on the Dark Crystal together. And then they wanted to do something else, and then David Bowie got approached, and he had been wanting to be in more of a children's type movie with kind of the success of Muppets and things like that. So we get the glorious monstrosity that is Labyrinth. The movie opens up with the worst CGI owl ever, flying around. Apparently it was the first time a CGI animal had been attempted, or shown for more than a brief second in film, and it's awful when you look at it, but you just accept and move on. And he flies around the park and a dark background while we're getting introduced with just the credits and things. And then the owl lands in a park where our main protagonist, Sarah, is acting out a play accompanied by her adorable English sheepdog, Merlin. And she's trying to remember some lines for this play as she's talking to the owl, telling him to give back the child because she has all the power in her kingdom. And then the clock tower strikes 7 and she's like, ah, crap. I'm supposed to be babysitting my brother, and darts home as fast as she can. She gets home, and it starts raining on her, because of course it does, and Merlin is soaking wet, and the poor dog gets banished to the garage because he's muddy and wet, and justice for Merlin. And Sarah goes inside and gets yelled at by her stepmother because her stepmother and her father are going out for a date. And
in the rain? Come on.
Right. And Sarah's like, you guys have a date every weekend, and like rude on her parents to like force her to babysit and like just assume she's gonna do it all the time. And Irene's like, we don't go out all the time, and Sarah's like, you go out like every weekend, and it's like rude. Just let the poor teenager be a teenager, but fine. So Sarah's upset and she storms off in like the classic 80s upset teenager, hide in bedroom, not talk to anyone. And
I don't know if that's just 80s teenager.
But it was like very much a trope in 80s movies where we like
Right.
show the girl like storm off and like flop into bed. And then her parents are like, well, we're leaving. Toby's in his crib. And then her brother, or she's upset because she can't find Lancelot, her toy bear. And she goes into her brother's room and it's on the floor. And she's just like, I hate this place. It's awful. I hate this baby. And just like upset. And then you get a flash of just a whole face of goblins just like staring at her. And you're like, what? What's happening? And then she's just like trying to rock the child, make him stop screaming. And then she's like, God, I just wish that you'd stop screaming. And then the goblins are like, well, if she would just wish that the goblins would take her away, then it's not that hard. And finally she gets the right words out and says like, I wish the goblins would take you away to the Goblin King so I never had to deal with you ever again. And then she turns
Who
off.
just says that?
Right? It's such a specific wish, but the whole play and things that she's acting out and the stuff in her room is basically a shrine to whatever this Goblin King was. So it's kind of hinted that it's like whatever her like childhood toys were. And she turns the light off and storms out, and then the baby stops crying, which is always suspicious, and turns around and there's Toby's just gone. And that white barn owl that we had seen at the beginning flaps against the window, kind of, and there's like maniacal laughter, and Sarah's spinning around and just missing like the shadows of all of the goblins everywhere. And then she turns and there is the Goblin King standing in front of her being like, don't worry, I got the baby. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And Sarah's like, how about we don't though? And the Goblin King's like, no, you asked me to do this. You spoke my name. And so I'm going to take the baby and he's going to become one of us forever.
Oh,
and
no.
She's like, no. And he goes, why don't you take this crystal ball instead? Which like he tells her it does nothing except for show her dreams, which is kind of a useless magic item.
I remember from that, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah. And you're like, if you're going to offer me something for a baby, give me something that will like tell the future so that I can like win the lottery. Make it useful, but this is fine. And so Sarah's like, nope, don't want this. And then the Goblin King goes, fine, you have 13 hours to make it through the labyrinth. And then if you can rescue Toby, then you win. But otherwise, he's mine. And his clock has 13 numbers on it instead of the usual 12.
Well, good for him.
Because he's special. And then he like opens the window, and then instead of vaguely British area, it's some like hand-drawn like labyrinth leading into this big castle thing that we're presumed to be where the Goblin King holes up in. And then he yeets off because he can turn into an owl, and Sarah runs into Hoggle, who is, I think he's supposed to be a dwarf, working as a gardener on the outskirts of the labyrinth. And when you see him, he's squirting fairies with like bug spray and just counting like 56 and 57 and like just squirting them as they die. Oh. And Sarah's like, no, what are you doing? Fairies are wonderful mythical creatures. And then she picks one up and it bites her. And then he's
nice.
Like, laughs maniacally.
I'm glad we both brought carnivorous fairies.
That's kind of the media I'm more used to, is kind of like not so great or sketchy fairies, or the types of fairies that will stab you.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah then asks Hoggle to show her the way through the labyrinth, And he's like, well, I wouldn't go in the labyrinth. That's not a good choice. And she's like, okay, well, do I go right or left? And then he goes, well, I wouldn't go that way. So then Sarah goes right instead of left. And Hoggle, like, bothers off, and Sarah starts to walk after being told she's taken too many things for granted, and she's walking forever in this straight line, and it's a seemingly endless corridor, which, like, most D&D players would know to make, like, a perception check or, like, turn around, but Sarah just keeps going and then decides she's just taking it for granted that the corridor is endless, which I don't know what that means either. So she runs, and then nothing happens. So she, defeated, kind of leans against a wall, and this worm, the blue worm with like the most ridiculous hair, is like just comes out of nowhere and is like, hello. And she goes, did you just talk? And he's like, yeah, it's me. Do you want to come inside for a bit? And he's got like a little tiny hole into what we presume is his tiny worm house. Aww. And he's like, why don't you come out and hang out? And she's like, no, I gotta find a door. And he goes, what do you mean? There's doors everywhere. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he just like, right in front of you, there's a door. And then it turns to right in front of her, and it's just more of the labyrinth wall. But then Sarah like walks up to it and then is able to walk kind of through it, and she goes, oh. And so this kind of her first impression of things are not always as they seem. So she goes, and then she starts to go left, and the worm goes, no, don't go that way, never go that way. And she's like, oh, thanks, and goes the other way. And then it turns to the worm, and he says, well, if she would have gone left, she would have gone straight to the castle. And you're like, oh, but tiny worm friend, that's exactly what she wanted to do.
Aww.
Meanwhile, Toby, the baby, is having a bad time in a pit of goblins.
I bet.
They're just jumping around him, and he's just standing in the middle of this pit as they're like jumping around him crying. And I have to wonder if the baby who was subjected to being the baby in this movie has like an innate fear of goblins now.
Or puppets.
Or puppets in general. And David Bowie's kind of leaning on his throne, kind of looking like he regretted taking the baby because he's screaming, and, you know, that's just not a fun time.
Right.
And then we get the strangest song of the film, which is You Remind Me of the Babe. What babe? The babe with the power of voodoo. Who do you do? Which is just the strangest. With some questioning parenting in voice, because I believe at one point they're like, just slap your baby and set him free. Which is just, why? What? I do not recommend that, but all right. That's fine. This is how it's gonna go. It does seem to make Toby more happy being played with and sung at, though, so at least the baby's not screaming.
Good.
Then we cut back to Sarah, who has been like writing arrows on stones to try to remember which direction she's going, but every time she does, this little like monkey goblin, who's like maybe the size of like an action figure, will like jump up and then like switch the direction that's facing or flip it over, and he's complaining like, I can't believe she'd be writing on my stones. Your mother is an aardvark. And then Sarah figures out that they've been switching the marks and that the labyrinth doesn't stay static and are changing, and then she meets with the door puzzles, which are a blue and a red shield, that one of us always speaks the truth, one of us always tells a lie. And Sarah asks them, if I were to ask him, what would he tell me? And I've never understood this logic puzzle, because you literally could just go, what's 2 + 2? And whoever tells you 5 is wrong, and then you know which door is telling the truth or not. But we went with the higher level thinking, big brain maneuver. And so Sarah like actually logics it out to the point where the doors are confused as to what she's doing. And then she goes, I'm so smart. I know this one isn't certain death. And then she like opens it and then immediately falls into an obulate and is grabbed by the helpful hands, which always like were concerning to me because it's just like these like latex hands as she's falling, like just slowly like passing her down this hole. Which was just always a little creepy for me as a kid. I mean, this whole movie's a little bit creepy, but for whatever reason, the hands stick out to me the most.
Okay.
Fair. But they catch her, and then she's like, let go. And they're like, but where are your helping hands? We're just trying. Which direction do you want to go? And instead of staying up to get back on the surface like a person or like a reasonable person, because what I would have done is gone up and then gone through the other door. She was like, let's go down. And then ominously, one of the hands goes, she chose down. And she's like, wait, was that a bad choice? Too late. And you're like, okay, that's fine.
She can't change her mind? Why can't she just change her mind?
Because once you've committed, you got to commit. And that's it. You don't get to just switch it around. So then she's down at the bottom of this dungeon that can only be accessed by this hatch past all the helping hands, and she runs into Hoggle, who I don't know why he's here, but he is. And so Sarah bribes him with a plastic bracelet because he likes collecting like jewelry and bracelets and things to help her back toward the labyrinth and get her to her brother. Mm-hmm. And so one of my favorite scenes is Hoggle takes a piece of wood and picks it up and then puts it just on some random stone and opens it up and it turns into a broom closet. And he just looks back and he goes, well, it can't always be right on the first try. Closes it, opens it, like the hinge was on the other side, and goes, all right, let's go. And then like walks through the door.
Okay.
And they end up in the room with the false alarms, which are kind of like the big stone hens being like, turn back, it's not safe here. And it turns out they just spew fake information. And one of them's just like, wait, can I just say my whole thing? Because I never get to say it anymore.
Aww.
So they get through the kind of underground area, and then they climb up a ladder and end up in kind of like a courtyard gardeny place where they meet the wise man who has a hat with a bird on top of it. And they kind of banter back and forth, and he tells them like which direction to go. And then it kind of pans out, and then there's this scene with kind of like a hedge maze where they're walking, and you see just this red guard that is like horribly lost in this hedge maze, kind of like going off in some direction and just like misses Sarah and Hoggle. And then they hear screaming, and Hoggle faffs off because he's not a brave man. And Sarah's like, you know what? Everything in this place is weird, and I'm just going to keep going because at this point I'm like in the middle of this maze. Mm-hmm. And so she turns, and then she runs into a big, shaggy, hairy monster who we find out later is Ludo, being attacked by goblins with sticks. And so Sarah starts throwing rocks at the sticks, or rocks at the goblins to stop them, and then she helps Ludo down, and he looks kind of like a big orangutan with horns, and they find a couple of doors that one has the door knocker in his ears and the other one has the door knocker in his mouth, so one can't hear you and one can't talk to you. And they go through one of the doors and then kind of end up in a random jungle because nothing in this place makes sense. And it looks like this would be a location where you would find a rodent of unusual size. It kind of looks like the exact same jungle that's in Princess Bride. Okay. And so they're trudging through there, and while Sarah's slowly losing Ludo, we see Hoggle and the Goblin King having a conversation, and the Goblin King gives Hoggle a crystal and turns it into a peach, and he's like, give this to Sarah. And Hoggle's like, it's not going to hurt her, is it? And so you're kind of seeing Hoggle kind of have like trying to decide whether or not he's going to be a good guy or not. Mm-hmm. Sarah then goes on the weirdest adventure with the fairies or the firefly things. I don't really know what they're called. They look like weird birds with like detachable body parts, and they're jumping around, and it's just this strange song and dance. And Sarah manages to escape by like taking their heads and throwing them away, so they have to go get their head. And she climbs up a rope that actually takes her to Hoggle, who's trying to get her out of that area. And then they immediately fall into the Bog of Eternal Stench, which apparently its terribleness is that if you touch the bog, you're going to smell bad forever and it'll never come off of you. Which is, I guess the worst thing ever. And they run into
worst.
The literal worst, because you'll never be able to wash it off. And they run into Sir Didymus, who is like a small like fox terrier raccoon thing, who's defending the bridge out of the Bog of Eternal Stench. And Hoggle's like, F this, and just walks by him and powers through. And then Sir Didymus is like, no, I will defeat you. And then him and Ludo start to have a battle. But Sir Didymus is like maybe a foot tall, and Ludo is like 7-8 feet tall. So they have this like one-sided match, and then Didymus is like, you are a great knight, sir. I have never been bested in my life. You guys can pass. It's cool. I'm gonna come with you. Come on, Ambrosius. And then the sheepdog from the beginning of the movie shows up, and then Sir Didymus now rides Merlin/Ambrosius into battle.
Does Sarah realize about the dog?
Sarah never addresses the dog, which made me incredibly sad, because like if my sheepdog friend just showed up in like this strange place, I'd be really happy to see him, but Sarah apparently had different priorities.
I guess so. Wow.
Then the gang keep going. Sarah takes a bite of the peach that Hoggle got from the Goblin King, because everyone was hungry, and then she's now like poisoned, and then kind of enters a dream world with the floating crystals that are also maybe bubbles, and they have like a Phantom of the Opera-esque goblin masquerade where they're kind of dancing around each other. And then Sarah manages to break out of this weird dreamscape by seeing the clock and remembering, crap, I only have like an hour to save my brother. So she takes a chair and like smashes a mirror, and then falls into a junkyard that kind of looks like it's the back of a tractor or a Cracker Barrel, because it's just like some wood chairs and some wicker baskets and stuff just all piled on top of each other. And then she meets the junk lady, who has like a bunch of possessions on her back. And the junk lady's like, oh, here's your teddy bear you were looking for. And Sarah's like, oh, maybe it was just a dream. And she like enters her bedroom, and there's all her stuff in there. And then she tries to leave to go check on Toby, because she remembers Toby existed. And turns out you can't hide in your bedroom, and all of your problems will go away no matter how much you want them to. And the junk lady is still alive. So Sarah has to kind of like run through and get out and be like, nope, all of this stuff is junk. I just need to save my brother. And she hooks back up with Ludo, Didymus, and Hoggle, and they try to enter the Goblin City for a final push to the Goblin King. Meanwhile, Toby is still having kind of a bad time, but less of a bad time. They have these random flashes to David Bowie just holding the baby in his chair, and then we just kind of go back, and he's like, hey, remember the plot? Here's the plot, and then come back.
Do you think that David Bowie appreciated filming those scenes with the baby? Because he never strikes me as someone who wants to hold a baby.
Right? I don't know. I feel like he wanted to do a children's movie, so I feel like he expected to have to interact with babies. But I can't.
I feel like he never sells those scenes.
No,
he never seems pleased.
No, I think
it's just me projecting that I never want to hold a baby.
I get that. I feel like it's more maybe he just wants the baby to be a goblin, and it's just not time yet for the baby to turn into a goblin.
Okay.
But I get that projection. Sarah's crew have to fight their way through a goblin army, and they end up having to get hideaway in a house because there's just too many goblins. And Sir Didymus, the entire time in the battle, thinks he's winning, even though he's clearly losing always. And he goes, see, I've backed you guys into a corner. If you put down your weapons, I will treat you kindly, as he's surrounded by guys with spears. And then Ludo, who has had the power to command boulders, just starts like screaming in the distance, and then all these boulders come out of nowhere and just like take out the goblins and then clear a path for everyone. And you're like, where was this like 20 minutes ago, buddy? But I guess better late than never. Then Sarah finally makes it to the Goblin King, where they have kind of like I must fight him alone, so she leaves her friends behind. And then they're in like the MC Escher stairs, and the Goblin King's like, you can't reach me, and then Toby's just like on the other side of the room, like crawling upside down on some stairs as Sarah's trying to get to him. And then she finally realizes if she jumps instead of just trying to run, she'll just slowly float down. Which I don't know that I would ever have come up to that logic process. And then
that seems scary.
Right. And then she realizes that the Goblin King only has power over her because she lets him have power over her. And so she finishes the lines from the play that she was acting out at the beginning of the movie and says, you have no power over me. And then the Goblin King gets sad and turns back into a owl. And then she's just popped back into her reality next to in her house as the clock strikes midnight, and she goes and checks on the baby who's sleeping and is fine. And then the last scene is her in her room, and Ludo is in the mirror, and he goes like, bye, Sarah. And she's like, wait, no, but I still need you guys. And then she turns around, and there's just like all of the goblins and Ludo and Didymus and Merlin and Hoggle just like having a party in her bedroom as David Bowie just kind of stares at her through the window like a weirdo, and then he just kind of faffs off into the moon. And that's Labyrinth.
Nice.
It's a weird movie, and I forgot how weird it was until I watched it again. But it's a fun ride.
Yeah.
And my husband, who got subjected to watching it with me earlier, was like, can you imagine trying to pitch this movie now? And just being like, yeah, we're going to have like this weird coming of age story with David Bowie just singing strange songs at you the whole time.
I can't think of anything comparable to it now.
This genre and era of movies are just fantastic. The puppetry work is excellent. Anything that Jim Henson touches is amazing. And I enjoy this movie. And the Goblin King, I got to fairies because of the fairies that Hoggle was squirting at, but I also had in my head, because of the Dresden Files, the Earl King is a fairy. He's also the king of the goblins. So I made the logic leap that this Goblin King was also the king of the fairies, even though they never really say that. But that's how I got there.
Hey, it's a good leap. We only have to be tangentially related to our word.
All right, so I have just 2 questions for you. So the false alarms are big rocks that shout out falsehoods. Based on an interview with Jim Henson, what were they originally going to be called? The Far Criers, the Phony Warnings, the Fake Reporters, or the Lying Rocks?
None of those are as good as the false alarms. I feel like Lying Rocks is just like what someone would write down in place of an actual title.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not what they were going to be called. They were going to be called the Phony Warnings. I'm glad they settled on false alarms.
Yeah.
And then what is the Goblin King, what is his first name? Is it Gregory, Hobgoblin, Jareth, or Moash?
Jareth.
Yeah. Jareth the Goblin King.
Except I like the first one, Gregory.
Gregory.
And before you were giving me the options and I did not immediately remember that it was Jareth, I was thinking, Mike! Because I don't know why. That seems like it'd be a great Goblin King name.
Mike the Goblin King. He comes for our souls.
Oh, no. Okay. That was great. Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah. Happy to talk about it. Do you have a guess for my quote? Would you like to hear the quote again?
I'll hear it again. I have a guess, but I don't think it's right.
Okay. Fairies have to be one thing or the other, because being so small, they unfortunately have room for one feeling only at a time. They are, however, allowed to change, only it must be a complete change.
Okay, I think it's from Peter Pan.
It is!
Oh, yay! Okay.
It's describing Tink. Tinkerbell was being real mad, and they're like, well, she's not always evil. She just currently can only be evil, because she's got the one feeling.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. Okay, cool. I feel like in the subsequent, Fairy Hollow things that Disney created, that I have only seen one of them, and it was in passing as my roommate was watching it, and I was totally doing something else.
Sure.
But I feel like they have complex emotions and character building in those, so they did not follow on with that true Tinkerbell lore.
No, and the quote I have is from the book, and so they just, I think it's adaptation, and Tink can only feel one or two feelings at a time, because she's tiny evil fairy barbarian, but I don't think they stick to that as well in the movies.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. That's a good quote. All right. Do we have another word from the generator?
Generator, what's our word for next week?
The next word is food.
Food.
Food. Good food. I actually have instantly what I think I'm going to talk about.
I have something that instantly came to mind. I'm not sure if it's what I'm going to talk about.
Fair enough.
But it's good. Will this be the one that we say the same thing?
We'll find out next time.
Find out next time.
On our 10th episode. We've made it to double digits. Woo woo. And remember to tweet at us if you knew where the quote came from, or what you talk about for the word fairy, or what you talk about for the word food. And please share with your friends if we managed to give you a sensible chuckle.
Even just one friend.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be multiple friends.
Yeah.
Post it on your Instagram story or something. Something inconsequential. You don't have to commit to it. Just put it out there.
Yeah.
That's all
just
we're
be
asking.
Hey, I like listening to these two weirdos talk about some random stuff. You should listen to them too. It was a good time.
Cool. Maybe we
right.
should do that ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Let's create fake accounts and shamelessly promote ourselves.
I'm doing my best with the social media. And with that, I've been Stephanie.
And I've been Allison. Thanks so much for listening.
Yep, thanks for listening to Nerd of the Week. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
We didn't do our normal ending.
Oh, remember, if you don't have anything cool to say, play word association with the random word generator.
Okay, now bye.
Now bye.